Okay, let's get going. My name is Mac McKelvey. I am the founder and CEO of Salient MG, a strategic marketing firm. We specialize in B2B, working with tech companies around the world, and mostly specialize in ad tech. I've spent about the last 10 years in ad tech, so I was thrilled that Advertising Week asked me to moderate, and thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. What I'm going to do is have each of them introduce themselves, their company, and talk about your specific discipline, and then we're going to jump in. Kyle?
Sounds good. Yeah, I'll kick it off. Thanks for having me. Kyle Dozerman, I'm the Vice President of Demand at PubMatic. For those of you who are not familiar, it's a global omni-channel SSP. So I spend most of my time thinking about how to help publishers better deliver more effective, sustainable programmatic ad products to buyers.
Fantastic. My name is Andy Service. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for Outfront Media. We are taking an out-of-home, old world, 80-year-old company and turning it into a digital media company, everything through display devices, from digital displays all the way through a user interface and an ability to add data and audience information to the way that you buy our media now that the rest of the world has gone digital.
And I'm Thomas. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Ogury. This is my second company in the ad tech environment. Created the first company around outstream video formats and ended up selling it to Teads. And after that, 5 years ago, created Ogury. And we're the first digital marketing engine that is powered by user consent and then choice first. And then we'll go into detail after that, I'm sure, around transparency during this panel.
That's a good segue. So again, to make sure you're in the right room, we're talking about transparency today, particularly in the world of how it relates to the consumer, but also for the advertiser and publisher. What is it going to take to create a really true, open, and fair marketplace? That's what we're going to be talking about today. We're counting on all of you to ask questions. So if you'll go into your app and sign up to send us some tweets, we'll be able to see them down on the screen, and we'll make this a little bit more interactive. The other thing that I've asked the panelists is to, let's talk. Let's have a real discussion about what it's going to take, because we're in a point in time in our industry where there's some serious things we need to overcome. So with that, let's start with number one. Sure. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being completely transparent and open, 10 being opaque and closed, where are we today as an industry? Are we closer to open, or are we still a pretty closed and opaque world? Tomas, you want to start?
I would say a 9.
9?
A 9 because the industry made a little bit of progress around the last, I would say, year, but definitely still a 9 because we know we ran a study on like 287,000 people globally, worldwide, around like GDPR, transparency, data, etc., and then only 8% of people are aware of the use of their data 1 year after GDPR.
You said 8%?
8, yes. That's why I'm saying a 9, because I don't want to be too harsh in saying a 10, but for me that's a big 9.
It's a big 9, so somewhere between maybe 9 and 10.
Yeah.
Andy, what about you?
I'm about the same. I think GDPR woke some folks up, so maybe it moved slightly down the scale, but it is not anywhere near where we need to be with regard to making an open marketplace for this type of stuff. CCPA will start the thinking here in the United States, but I'm not so sure that that is going to be done in a way that is similar to GDPR or a little bit more business friendly as it goes through the stuff. The last panel that was up, or the speaker that was up, Lauren, did a great job of talking about privacy, and the stats that she showed prove that we're not yet aware, to your point in your survey, we're not yet aware of what that does for the consumer as well as for advertisers trying to buy some publishers' inventory.
So we're going to dig into regulation because I think you're right. I think there's some things to unpack there. Kyle, what about you?
Yeah, so I'd probably agree. I think it's worth unpacking like the different aspects. So if you look at, like, we've spent a lot of time at PubMatic focused on the supply path because we're inherently part of the supply path.
Give me a number first.
I'll say 8.
Okay.
But I think, so in that regard, I think we've done a lot. Ads.tech, supply chain object, like buyers have a much better idea than they have years past about how they're accessing media, who's sourcing it for them, et cetera. But in the app world, in the data world, I agree. Like, very long way to go for the reasons cited. Okay,
so nobody out here be easy on this panelist, right? Let's ask some good questions. So with that, what is the top transparency issue we're facing today? I mean, we've had lots, right? Every industry has their own problems. But what in your mind is the top issue right now? From what you guys all just said, I think I can guess, but let's just name one thing. I know there's many.
Data, user opt-in, consent, like the industry hasn't fundamentally figured that out. I don't think anywhere, but certainly not in the US. And without that, we're going to have a lot of issues.
So consent.
Yeah.
I'll take a different tack, but that is one of them as well, which is what advertisers understand the use of where their inventory, what the inventory they bought, where that being placed. So that long tail, that sort of subprime inventory within the display space and the mobile space is a myth, and it doesn't really do anything for the objective that the advertiser originally purchased.
So we have consent, brand safety-ish, placements, okay.
And then for me, it's more like the second step of brand safety would be data safety. And then for the brands to be able to know that the data that they're leveraging is clear, has been consented in a proper GDPR or CCPA way, and is traceable. Because the problem is today, the entire industry wants more data, but the data that's out there, 99% of the time, you don't know how it has been collected, and you don't know if it's collected in a proper way. So then you're using data that might be completely toxic, and then you have a huge risk of brand damage, way more than just brand safety in terms of the inventory.
So let's stay on you for a moment. So, and I hope that I don't oversimplify any of your businesses, but let's talk about specific challenges with transparency in channel. So mobile, can you start with mobile? And are there any things that you haven't just discussed that are specific to the mobile channel that you believe really needs to be cleaned up?
I think in the mobile environment, but more broadly in the digital environment, the problem is that the user, we've been talking to the user like a kid for the last 20 years, pretending that everything is free, and then suddenly users are like annoyed by advertising, but they don't understand that it's the advertising, that it's financing the content. So when you talk to the users like adults saying, look, this game, for example, this is not free. This is $4.99. So you have 3 ways to go with that game. Either you pay with money, like you would do if you buy a PlayStation game. No one complains that they buy PlayStation games. So either you pay $4.99 with money, or you pay with data. So you agree to share some data with the publisher so you can monetize it with advertising and better advertising, or you're against everything and you will have a really bad experience, but that's your choice. But at least you educate the user and you include him in the mix and not trying to like steal data from his back pocket, pretending everything is free.
And then I imagine also within mobile, the location aspect, right? So it is the always-on device. So are you seeing the same thing? Do you address location within Ogury?
At Ogury, no, we don't, because we feel like this is not what we do. We're doing branding advertising, not drive to store. But I feel like when we asked the user globally, like 72% of them, they are willing to share information in exchange of content, as long as they know what they're selling their foot into. And the problem is today, 99% of the content, it's like 23 pages long. No one reads it because it's too ambiguous, and it's not clear what data is gathered. So it needs to be short, straight to the point, plain English, and then the user has to have the same choice between saying yes and saying no, rather than just saying agree, 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 or no more. This is not CCPA compliant or GDPR compliant in any way.
Andy, you mentioned digital out of home. What is unique? Are there any transparency issues unique specifically to that channel? Or TBD?
Well, we have a unique opportunity because digital out of home hasn't yet emerged into the marketplace from a buying standpoint, from using audience data to be able to sell an ad based on a location. So we can set the groundwork from the beginning in a fully transparent way, and that's our intention, which is to understand location for out of home is the key. That brings context to what we're talking about. That allows us to be able to put the right ad at the right time in front of the right people in a environment where someone may be more inclined to take an action, to go into a store, to drive into a certain place. And so from the beginning, the way we were designing this is to the ability to say, all right, to the advertiser, this is the information we've gathered. These are the algorithms we use to assess what information was used to put your ad in that particular spot. Any data guy at any advertiser or agency can look at that data, understand it, audit it, and appreciate what has been done for that. We also are privacy by design from the beginning, so we're never going to take possession of PII. Whether it was consented or not, we don't need to have that type of information.
So you're not taking it or not storing it? Or
We're not
both?
taking it, and we will then fuse in the background with someone else's information, so we're aggregated and anonymous all the way through the chain, so no one can ever accuse us of being very specific to a particular person. Everybody has seen the movie Minority Report from a while ago. We do not want to be that. There may be some people who will consent to that, but that's not what we want to do. We think we can be just as effective with out-of-home media and have a substantial lift in value by taking advantage of a very transparent system where privacy is protected.
And Ogury's how old?
5 years old.
And Outfront Media is how old?
80 years.
80 years, but I'm sorry, the digital out-of-home component is how old?
On one hand, you can count the number of years we've been doing
Okay, so what I'm getting at is coming over to Kyle. So PubMatic's been around
12 years.
Yeah, so more of a legacy business in this space, but how, if you can touch on digital, or you tell me, but I think digital, and then how for a company that's been established and is going through the iterations, how are you addressing, or what specific challenges are you seeing that may be unique to?
Yeah, so I think in a big sense, what Thomas talked about is we're spending a lot of time thinking about that, the opt-in, how to the user consent engagement on the publisher side, how we scale that across the broad internet. So certainly that, and then I think there's some more tactical stuff. So app is still like phenomenally unmeasurable. Like the major advertisers I talk to want to spend more there, can't measure it, basic viewability, stuff like that. So we're focused a lot on that, continue to try to evolve the supply chain efforts. Again, I mentioned I think we've done a decent job there, but there's still work to do. Sometimes pricing is still not as transparent as it should be. I think massive consolidation is going to be helpful. So a lot of the problems created in the industry are a result of fragmentation, and all of these players create all these entry points, right? So just helping push that evolution forward is kind of our focus right now.
Just interesting you talk about mass consolidation is going to help. Actually, GDPR, I think, had an unintended consequence, which is to force consolidation. Because GDPR, when you have to now accept something, so you're opting into something, you're going to be more apt to say yes to Google, yes to Facebook, and no to some smaller website that may provide significant value to you, but you're not very familiar with it. So you're going to say no over here, forcing all of your information to be stored by the big guys, and then the big guys monetizing that in more ways, creating that power loop to themselves. And the smaller guys will suffer from that. I think that's unintended consequence and probably bad for the industry, the opposite of what you were suggesting. But
I couldn't agree more, which is why the consent model for the open internet, the non-walled gardens, has to be not publisher by publisher by publisher.
Some sort of an opt-in to the whole set.
Yeah, you're going to run into this problem.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I'm going to jump down here and see if we can take some question from the audience right now. Why do you think individual consumers should care about transparency? And that's a great question. How does that differ from the reasons brands should care about transparency? I think we've touched on it a little bit, which is what you were saying, that that users don't necessarily, we're not talking to them in a way that they can very easily understand what we're asking of them and how we're using their data. Is there anything to add on that? Is there anything anything for consumers? And then let's switch over to brands. I think we talked a little bit about the brand placements, but how does it differ?
If you were told that your information, I've seen a few studies on this, was worth about $3,000 a year, how would you spend that? To your point, right? Would I invest it in certain services? Would I take the cash and let everyone use it for whatever it is? But I don't think folks are aware of that. That's the big thing for them. Separate from, to go to the question, separate from what brands are worried about safety, they're worried about placement, they're worried about value for money. And so there are two sides to this transparency game, and I think we're a 9, back to your scale, on both sides.
Fair enough. Anything to add on that for brands? I think you touched on that a little bit already too.
Yeah, I think this question is interesting. So as an individual, I probably care tremendously less about transparency than the general public. Like But you're more educated, arguably, right? Because you're in the industry, so you understand how things are built. But as long as the service is good and it's more tailored, so like when, I don't use an Android phone, but when I did, if Google makes a recommendation to me that's useful, like I'm pretty happy and I'm not terribly worried about my data. That being said, like it's very clear that most people do, or at least a large portion. So I don't know why should an individual care more about transparency? I don't personally know the answer, but they clearly do. So like as an industry, we have to care about it.
Yep, fair enough. Okay, I'll take one more and then I'll jump back. So how much burden should we put on the consumer in there? Okay, so actually, this is a really great question. What does an open and fair marketplace look like? What does it even look like? I mean, we all speculate and we all probably have opinions, so let's define it. What would it look like a year from now, perhaps?
I think it looks like everyone understands the ecosystem, and then starting with the users. Because the problem is today, the users, they're there. Everyone wants to have access to the user. More data, but more data is not the solution. The solution is to have like user first, and then have the users that choose to share or not to share. And in the end, what will happen is like, let's say you're a publisher, you have 100 of interstitial to monetize. Well, I think a few years down the line, you will monetize maybe 50% of that with clearly opt-in users, twice the price of what you used to do with 100% of your inventory. So then you can make the same money, or even make more money if you want by monetizing the second half, but at least it will be consented data, traceable data that you can leverage and then sell to a higher price to the brand because it's brand safe at the end of the day, and the user knows exactly what he's setting his foot into.
Any other opinions?
I don't have some like robust answer. I think it's just you know how the system works. Like the lack of transparency always shows up when a buyer says, "Oh wait, I thought I was getting this," or "I thought it worked that way." So I think it's all participants, consumers, buyers, publishers, just knowing how the system works.
The democratization of this ecosystem has yet to be achieved. And so both from the user standpoint as well as from the brand standpoint, if everyone understood what they were getting and what they were buying and what the value chain is all the way through, it would be a much better place. Are we anywhere near that? No, not even close. What we're hoping to do in the out-of-home space is to sort of start that fresh with a medium that hasn't yet been monetized in the way with data. And to the extent that we can do that by being very honest and open with regard to the data we use, the algorithms we use to place it, and then the information as to where that ad was placed so that the brands can feel comfortable that they got what they paid for, we start to see something that looks more like an evolved system. But we're a long way from that. And people have to care. People really have to care and spend money where it is. And I think there's a lot of people who are sort of just push by, and it's okay, whether that's the consumer or it's the brand. And unless you're going to sort of take responsibility for what's happening through the ecosystem, it won't change quickly.
I think two things. From the user's point of view, I used to give the Spotify example. On Spotify, you have two types of users. Either you pay, and you have no advertising, no tracking whatsoever. You pay for the service, or you don't, but you have advertising. And I'm pretty sure 99% of the people that are not paying, they're not complaining about the advertising because they know they have it for free. So it's a fair deal from the start. So that's the model that I think in the end should be applied on the overall internet, where you choose. You pay or you access with advertising, but at least you know it's not totally free. And that's from a user standpoint. And from a brand standpoint, I think it's the responsibility of the media agencies to push and educate their brands into the brand safety of the future, which is the data and the traceability of the content.
And to that end, if I could just add to that, if you are the user and you're saying, okay, I'm willing to give you my information in exchange for a service, what information are you collecting? Are you collecting my location, my name, my address, my this, my that, my everything, where I spend my time, where I work, what other search algorithms may be applied to that particular app? It might be a pretty tall order to say, yeah, I accept next time.
Yeah, or you simplify it and you say, okay, we're going to track your browsing activity and app activity, and then that's it. Then you don't go into the weeds of how we do it, but you need to understand as a, 50-year-old user, simple, what you're going to do with the data that you're sharing. Is it anonymous, not anonymous? And then what type of data? Just broadly, I think.
So, dumb question. Why don't we just do that?
Because it takes time. It takes time to educate the entire market, and then some people are reluctant to do it because they're afraid of, like, if I put a user consent and then suddenly I have, half of them saying yes, then what am I going to do? But it's a market shift, and they need to understand that they're going to do the same, if not better, with consented users, and the ones that don't want to consent, at least it's clear. Okay, you would have a degraded experience with maybe more advertising, non-targeted, but that's it. That's your choice as a user. You cannot force the user to do something you want if they don't.
Two words, inertia and insecurity. So right now the system works. There's lots of money being made by lots of people, and nobody wants to mess with that system. Insecurity, if I do mess with the system, will it have a negative consequence for me as a business? And how do I assess that for my bosses, my shareholders, and all the rest of the stuff? It could be very difficult to make a bold change like that is in the best interest of either users or brands, but without taking into account what the near-term business implications may be for that.
You know how you do the twist? If brands take the power in their hands and say, okay, we will never, ever advertise again on a non-consented user that has not been consented in the proper way. And that's it.
And only certain people have that power.
You shut it off.
Right.
If you don't have the branding
where's
dollars.
the center of power here, right? So it's the spend.
This is Mark Pritchard, right? So Mark Pritchard came out 2 years ago now and said, I'm done with this system. I don't understand it. It is a mess. It doesn't work. Yet P&G is still buying in the digital space. So we have to figure out how it is because it's too big to ignore.
So yeah, I think it's just a collective organization problem. Like outside of the walled gardens, we like to view ourselves as all kind of our own product. But from a P&G perspective, like open internet programmatic is one advertising product. And like it's our job to organize. So you say, why don't we do it? Well, it's like hundreds of thousands of websites and tons of tech companies, et cetera, have to get together and make one decision. It's obviously so much easier for Google and Facebook to do that. So it's just fragmentation and inability to organize.
I think some would argue they don't do it, though, either. If it's easy for them to do it, why wouldn't they do it?
Yeah.
Okay, moving on.
Who makes a lot of money on that, right?
Just
So those guys are the incumbents, and they make a lot of money on that. What you're seeing now, I think, a lot, and you can talk about this, is private marketplaces. So if a particular brand is saying to a publisher, I'd like to work with you more directly, and I understand your algorithms and the way that you're going to place my media, without having to worry about a long tail exchange where I may not be getting value, or I may not understand my safety issues, or I may not have viewability, et cetera, et cetera. These private marketplaces are emerging as the right place to start to have a little bit more control over what you're delivering.
So it's a leadership issue. It's someone just standing up and saying, enough.
Totally agree.
I think Mark Pritchard did that. It's just like,
I'm saying on the tech side.
I don't know. I don't know how to solve it. Like having one decision maker because you're one company is inherently phenomenally powerful. I mean, monopolies help as well, but like it's tremendous. And it's one of the things I've struggled with since I got into ad tech. It's just like, how do you get a big group of people that all have different incentives and masters to try to do one thing?
But I think you started a company based on that, right, Thomas?
Yes.
Based on that from the beginning, right?
Yeah, because we, well, as you can say, I'm French, so in Europe we have the GDPR that is way more stringent, I would say. And then, but we started the company 5 years ago, way before GDPR, because like, I don't know, we felt like the industry should go that way, and then we might as well start like that, and then ask the user first if he's willing to share data with us in order to have a better experience in the ecosystem that we're targeting the user. The thing is, we have, I would say, between 40 and 60% acceptance rate, and from the get-go, we decided to go like that, and to only treat those users, and to make sure that we were doing it the proper way. And then 4 years after, GDPR came into place, and then when everyone called us crazy 5 years ago, it was time for us to like reap what we sow. So we feel like the government, like the regulation, can push the industry towards that by putting in place like GDPR or CCPA, and then the industry will have to shift at some point.
So could that be an approach then? So you're mobile primarily?
Only.
Only? Okay.
Yes.
So creating a best-in-class approach in mobile, maybe as a digital at home. Your business yours is complex too, but yours is fundamentally very complex, right? You're across everything. You're across all channels, and you have a recent partnership with the company out of Canada. Is that right? The OTT and CTV partner. It doesn't matter. Around the Open SDK.
Open SDK, yeah.
So, but that's a similar approach, right? That's a step in the right direction, right? That it's a transparent model.
Yeah. So Open SDK is a good IAB initiative to make apps more measurable. So that's good. But so I do agree that compliance or the government can put something in place, or we can have innovation solve it. I think from a compliance perspective or a consent perspective, 1 or 2 or 3 approaches will help us solve that problem. But like we have others, and we'll continue to organize more slowly than we could. But we're going in the right direction.
That's great. I want to call this out, Andy, because I read you recently penned an article. I'm going to actually exactly quote it. Radical transparency in advertising will create growth. Radical transparency. Can you talk about that?
It's a little bit of an attempt to say you need to go further than anyone is going. So you can have regulatory with GDPR, CCPA. I think those will have unintended, uneducated consequences, and so you have to be able to be very thoughtful. I hope what will happen in the rest of the states here, and maybe even as CCPA evolves, it'll be a little bit more thoughtful about the business aspects and the consumer aspects. To the point of creating an ecosystem that is democratized and open, it always creates growth. And the article I wrote takes the comparison of what happened here in the United States when you had a monarchy back in the early 1700s that was telling the people this is all you can do. And when you got to a democracy, people evolved and were allowed to explode. And so the creation of wealth, the creation of innovation, all of the different things that happened in the United States to sort of lead a lot of the inspiration for the world became because of a democracy. It was allowed people to have free-flowing information. And if you can do that here in this ecosystem, I believe it creates growth for everyone. It may not be a winner for the existing winners, because winners today tend to keep all of the information for themselves so they can maintain that superiority. And when you start to open up avenues for other people to innovate around them, it forces people to work harder and allows, it may change the way the game is currently played. So,
do you think funding will follow that model? Do you think the future of funding in this industry will follow the more open companies? Will they reward that because of the pending regulation, that they become a little bit more nervous about funding non-compliant business models, perhaps?
I don't think that's going to change. Money will follow the best opportunity for it to increase its value, right? So if I put $100 in something, I want to have a model that's going to earn me the best return on that money. So if you found a different model that could challenge the incumbents, I think money will be attracted to that particular that model. And I think that may be one of the things that, as you're talking about Silicon Valley venture money now chasing different business models, one of the things is a more open and transparent model as the world starts to evolve.
Fair enough. Okay, let's jump into regulation. I'm going to jump over to questions in about 5 minutes. We touched a little bit on CCPA. Thomas, you're out of Europe. Primarily, you're here now. But GDPR, what's the best thing that came out of GDPR, and what's the worst thing that came out of GDPR?
I think the best thing is that it awoke the entire industry, and then publishers. A lot of the publishers we were talking to in Europe, even in the US, they were like, no, but I don't need to ask the user consent. I don't care. And we were like, yeah, but you know GDPR is coming, and you will have to. Yeah, well, we'll see. And once GDPR was there, then suddenly everyone woke up like, ooh, I need to do something. So that's where we help them with a consent manager to deal with all the consent for all their different partners. So I would say that's one of the good things, is that it alerted the publishers in the ecosystem to move forward. And the bad thing, I would say, is that it created some kind of a tension within the VC ecosystem where everyone's holding back, like, ooh, I don't know what's going to happen, so I'm going to wait for, I don't know, but I'm going to wait for like years and then see where it's going. So it creates some kind of a stop in the investment, I would say, opportunities.
Anyone else have any opinions on that?
A little bit of feedback on that. So I don't know if folks saw what happened last week with the Washington Post launched something called Zeus, which is an alternative to Facebook and Google. Jeff Bezos having an idea about what is going to be a better model. We'll see what that evolves to. I don't know. It's supposed to be on behalf of both publishers and brands to be able to find an ecosystem that's a little bit more open. Early details are that it is that type of a model where maybe venture capital, if not Jeff Bezos himself, are attracted to different models that account for all of the issues we're talking about.
Go ahead, Kyle, sorry.
No, I agree that it awaking the conversation. I think Andy already mentioned that the big downside was just the value equation with the walled gardens is more clear in this world than it is with kind of the open internet. So I think the benefit went to places it wasn't intended to.
So that sets up CCPA, and then the other states that are all that have proposed regulation. There's not a sweeping national regulation being considered right now. It's going to be state by state. How you guys feel about that? Seems like a win, right?
That'll be a mess.
It's going to be a challenge.
Let's let innovation solve the problem more quickly, hopefully.
Because we had self-regulation, right? We had an opportunity, but now we have to figure out how to work in this new regulated world. What is that going to do to this industry? State by state issues that impact some size of companies, some types of companies.
We'll help the walled gardens, right? They got the money to handle it.
How are they doing with GDPR in Europe? Compliant? Not compliant?
The walled gardens?
Yep, I'm
Yeah.
seeing some walled garden questions, so.
Well, it's their problem. They deal with GDPR the way they want. But the thing is, not being a walled garden and not being a giant, you need to innovate. Otherwise, you complain that you're not the big giants. Well, we should have created those companies. And then if you're small, then the only thing you can do is innovate and then being further down the line to those people and then showing the market how to do it. Because I think like the regulation, what they're asking is like, stop messing with the users. Just tell them what you're doing. And that's it. So you don't need a regulation to do that. And like for us, we are CCPA ready, what we like to say, because we're respecting the GDPR, but because we're just asking the user, and it's clear, not ambiguous, and then at least they know what they're selling their food to. And the problem I think in that industry is that it's going down the path of the cookie, which is, oh, by the way, we're using cookies. Okay or okay? That's not a user consent. When you have more than 90% user consent, that's not a consent.
Let's just quickly do a rapid fire, true or false only, no color, just true or false, okay? Have a little fun with this. Okay, we will see an open and fair ad marketplace in the next 12 to 18 months here in the US. True or false, quickly?
False.
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 Okay, scary. CCPA will not impact US companies like GDPR did in Europe.
Will not. False.
True.
False.
Okay, interesting. Okay, we've brought them up a couple times, but Facebook, Google, Amazon will be active collaborators in creating an open and fair marketplace.
False.
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 Surprising. There is a viable business model for consumer privacy-driven businesses in the ad tech industry.
True.
True.
Yes.
All right. Funding will dry up. We actually touched on this, but we'll have ask everyone the question. Funding will dry up for those who are not privacy-driven businesses.
True. Already has.
True.
Yeah.
Okay. Trump will win re-election.
Are you actually going to ask that one?
I was just seeing if the audience was awake. You don't have to answer that. Who in your company owns the role of creating a fair and open marketplace? Who specifically in your company owns that?
The right answer like has to be everyone, right? It's got to be built into the DNA. It's got to be built into the roadmaps and how products are built. Obviously, we have experts, legal, technical, probably like our CTO and our GSC. But yeah, it's got to be in every conversation. So I think we spend a lot of time trying to put it in our pillars of our thinking. So again, it's kind of like in our how we build products now and how we take them to market, et cetera. So we try to push it through everything.
Great. Andy?
I agree with everything what you said about the board, ultimately. If that's to set the tone for the company, the board has to say, this is how we're going to go do business going forward.
Tomas?
And for me, that's me to start with, to show the way, and then ultimately to everyone to follow in that direction. But yeah, it falls on me to show and then push in the direction of more transparency.
Okay, let's jump into a couple of these really quickly. I like the last one. Does asking users to pay consider economic inequality and unintended consequences of even bigger problems? So
It's a big question.
it is a big question. But I guess it goes back to your value exchange, right? You can say you can pay or not.
Do you think it's a problem on Spotify? I don't think so. If you don't want to pay, you don't pay. It's like asking is not forcing. So at least you have the choice, because before you didn't have the choice. So I feel like having the choice as a consumer myself to either pay or not pay, but knowing what's the value exchange, I don't see any harm in that. Zero.
I'm going to jump into the second one because I think it's actually a really interesting question. If consumer data is worth $3,000 a year, do you see a world where users on the internet could opt in and take a fee off their own data?
100%. I think this is a business model that is going to take off. I believe that if there's an educated
Whoever wrote this
consumer
question,
base,
you better get on this and trademark it.
Yeah, well, there's actually a few people that are already starting this in the Valley. If you can understand what that value is and create an exchange so that you can trade that value for something, I can buy a service, I can make it available to a particular brand where I have a relationship with Nike because I'm a Nike buyer, but I don't want to have a relationship with Walmart because I'm not a Walmart shopper. You can trade that data, and those brands would pay you for access to that data. This becomes a very interesting topic, but it requires a very educated consumer base.
I'm still deciding on this one, like the idea of like micropayments for articles and things like that. Like I think it's good in theory, but I can't make sense of it yet in practice. So just for myself, there's like 3 or 4 publications on the internet that I love, and I pay them $10 a month to read. Everything else, I don't want to deal with an economic exchange that requires like my involvement. So I like it, but I don't know where it sits yet.
It's fair. Okay, so fast forward 1 year from now, what do you not want to hear discussed at Advertising Week? It just is solved.
A year from now?
1 year from now, you're all sitting up here again. We're all sitting here laughing, and maybe someone doesn't win re-election. So we're talking about today. What is the one thing we're not talking about at Advertising Week because it's fixed in the world of transparency? It could be big or small.
Data being traceable.
Traceable?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good
Yes, and then so that everyone that buys knows exactly where the data comes from, and then where they leverage the data, and then how it has been collected. That's my wish. I'm not sure it will be fixed in a year from now.
Yeah. I'll piggyback on that and just say the same, but for supply. So understanding how you're getting it and make sure it's traceable. I think we're close on that one, so I think we actually will get there. Data would be awesome, but I think that's probably more than 12 months out.
I'll agree with the second one, which is the sort of the long tail of inventory getting monetized in a way that's probably uneconomic for the buyers.
So closing thought, we have 1 minute left. If everybody could just give, for the audience, just one thing you want them to leave here thinking about in the world of transparency, the things you look at every single day. What's the one thing you want to pass on that they can leave here and maybe look at differently than they did when they walked in?
Sure, so I'd say just in our world, I think, not always, but at the moment, there's actually a lot of technical solutions to some of the transparency problems, certainly within the supply chain. But we need buyers to only buy against those compliant requirements. So I'd like to see more buyers click the buttons that say, I'm only going to buy on ads.txt or apps.ads.txt or supply chain object or these types of things. So would like buyers to push their money towards it.
Andy?
On one of these panels a couple of years ago, I heard the only people who care about privacy live in Brussels or Washington, D.C., and I think that's changing. And I would hope that education allows everybody from the consumers as well as the brands to sort of force that function where they're going to say, I will only do this. I have some discipline around how I'm going to manage my presence in this exchange.
Take us home, Tomas.
And I would say if you're a brand, you should care about your brand safety, but care about your brand safety all the way through, and then care about the data safety now in 2019. So
the message is be better partners, focus on transparency. It's a good business model, and thanks, everyone. You can grab these gentlemen after.
Thank you.